Hi, everybody, and welcome to my interview with beautiful Carré Sutton Otis, who is a fantastic woman that I wrote about partly in my book. I wanted to share a little bit about how I met her. But first of all, I'd like to introduce you to her. I think you were born in San Francisco and you started modeling when you were very young, like 16, and you quickly became a star in that sense that you came on the covers of Vogue and Cosmopolitan, I think Marie Claire and others. And later on, you were also discovered being a great actress with your ex-former husband, Mickey Rourke, who's also director, because I think you did Wild Orchids, right? And also, was it Exit and Red he directed? Yeah.
He didn't direct those though.
Okay, he didn't. He
Yeah.
maybe
No.
produced. So if you have had an amazing journey, and I'm so grateful to sit here with you and share our sisterhood together. And you were so kind and wrote a blurb for my book. And so my whole story started actually by reading your book. Like I was so inspired by your book, Beauty Disrupted, that you've wrote like it's over 10 years ago, right?
Yeah, it was published in 2011, so I was working on it
Okay.
in 2010. Yeah,
Yeah, so it's been some time since then.
pre the
And
Me Too movement as well.
yes,
Courage, yeah.
yeah. So anyway, your book really inspired me to do some more research because, I was also never as famous as you, of course, but I was discovered by this agent in Sweden, and then he promised me a job in Monaco at first. So I went along and just like totally blew. And, I was still older, I was 21, but my journey there was full of like, I really wanted to be somebody. And I was, of course, very attracted to the idea of becoming the next Cindy Crawford.
Sure.
And so I followed him along, and there was no job for me there. And he was really just being kind of disgusting. And I was sexually abused by this agent or this scout.
Mhm.
And later on, we went on to Paris because he wanted to bring me to this model agency. And then I ended up at Elite. And that's also where you were at, but your story is far more serious than mine. But also there I was sexually abused, and I came up with this lie to I had to go back to Sweden to get my driver's license to get away because I didn't have a ticket to go back home.
Mm.
And it ruined really a big part of my life because I promised never to tell a soul about what had happened there. And I had a boyfriend at the time, and he couldn't even touch me. And it was just very, very awful.
Yeah.
So it took years to finally make peace with that. And also, I think it was like 5 years later that they had this big raid. But that was mainly the drug abuse that was going on there.
Yeah.
So after that, I was like, I have to do something about this, but I never really did. So I continued on my own journey, and then when I started reading your book, I was like all into like disclosure and finding the people who are abusing other people for their own benefits. And yeah, so that's kind of the short story how it started. So then when I asked you to, or I sent you this email to ask you to write that blurb, I was a bit nervous because I knew I had to do this disclosure. And it's at the same time the whole Me Too movement started. So it was like a collective conscious knowing
Yeah.
that we need to disclose the truth so these people can come out in the light. And yeah, so we can help other people or other women in this case.
Yeah.
So thank you again for being here. And
Thank you for having me.
I really like to hear a little bit about your background. How was it that you started modeling in the first place? What was the driving force behind that?
Well, it wasn't that I had aspiration to be a model, but more that the family that I grew up in, even though I'm so close with them all now and we've healed and transformed our lives, at the time was really, really dysfunctional. And it was in a time in history where everybody hid their dysfunction. Going to therapy wasn't something like it is now. Like, we all go to therapy, it's great. And then I think really everyone's secrets, there were secrets and they were hidden, and people didn't ask for help. And so I grew up in a really dysfunctional family without role models, without women mentors. And it really shaped, but that was part of what shaped how I felt about myself as a woman, as a young woman. There was no rite of passage. There was no empowerment modeled for me as a woman, as a girl growing into a woman. And I was dyslexic. And so for me, my childhood was really painful. And I ran away. I ran away several times, and then ran away and left high school after my first boyfriend committed suicide. And the only thing that I felt I could go do was potentially model. And that was a big if, you know. So I lied about my age. I found an agent in San Francisco who immediately sent Xerox fax pictures of me to John Casablancas and to Elite. And very quickly, I was like in that system. Yeah, I feel like it was just like this, a system, a production, and very, very naive. Even though a lot had happened for me, to me, I wasn't empowered, and I was young. I mean, that's one of the things within this industry is we're working with minors so much of the time, and also minors that are faced with very adult problems, very adult themes, sexual objectification, all of these myriad of cases that make it a potentially dangerous situation for young women that don't have advocates or mentors or anyone like that by their side. So I was quickly into that system, but similar to you, kind of dragged around with lots of promise, the naivety of, you know, you could make it. The actual percent of models that make it and make a living is really small, and the rest of the girls are really struggling. So moved to New York, and in New York, I was too European for the American market because it was Christy Brinkley, it was all the blondes at the time. So they sent me to Europe. I was sent to Paris, where my agent at that time, Gerald Marie, also took advantage of me. And I endured a lot there. And then I was sent to Milan. So it was about a year and a half at 16. You know, I went through sexual assaults, you name it. I saw it, I witnessed it, I went through it. Also told that there was a job in Lake Como. There was no job. It was basically an escort situation, unbeknownst to the many models that were told there was a job there, get on a bus and go. So as fate would have it, when I went back to Paris and was going through this assault from Gerald Marie, I was bit by a dog in the face.
What? I didn't know.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes. And I had to go back to home, but I really didn't have a home to go back to. So I actually went back, and some of my contacts and friends lived in Northern California on a farm. So I actually went back and began a healing practice and a healing process where, for the first time in my life, there were powerful women who were medicine women, they were shamans, they were midwives, they were herbalists, and it was like complete shift in living. I lived in a little cabin with no running water and electricity, and I just dove into healing because that was what was going on within the community that I had manifested. Somewhere spirit knew that's where I needed to go to heal. And it was at that time I met my first Buddhist teacher, Lama Tsotrama Leone, and started to connect all of these pieces. I feel like for lifetimes, all of these pieces came into focus. So it really wasn't, though, until maybe a year later that I even thought about venturing back out into modeling. And it was sort of a necessity in that I realized I didn't have a high school education. I still didn't have things under my belt, and I felt like that was going to be the only way to make ends meet. But it was at that time there was a big shift for me, and it really informs the life that I have today. Even though I continued to explore, go off the deep end, get lost, there was a place that I was able to return to that was safe. And it was really the first safety I knew in this life. So it was a big moment, but it wasn't. So I'm not one of those girls that like, wow, I was discovered immediately. Yeah, I went to Paris and I got an L cover. And then because I really wouldn't comply with the expectations, you know, I didn't make it at that time. And it took years for me to get Vogue and Guess and all of the other stuff that happened. It took years to get to that place in my own career.
What do you think was the driving force for you to come back to, even though you had endured all these things, like what was your driving force?
You know, I think it was the strength that that particular time gave me. It was really empowering. And when I plugged into my Buddhist path, when I plugged into my spiritual life, it was like, I felt for the first time like nothing can get me. Like I've got this. And of course, there were many things that got me after that, but there was a confidence and a connection with the universe, a connection with myself, a connection with the divine feminine that really fueled that, knowing that I could go out and make it. And I really, before that, I didn't have a sense of myself. I mean, what 16-year-old does? One of the things, though, similar to you that I missed, so we can't skip any step on our path. We can't skip over healing trauma. If the trauma's there, like, you know, you've got to heal that. So that was, for me, I skipped over that. And even though there was all these amazing things in my life and I felt like I had a strong sense of who I was and that I belonged on this planet, I still hadn't healed that trauma. And trauma from childhood. So even though I went out with that sort of fire and determination and like, I'm a goddess, you know, feeling, that trauma I would manifest that trauma again and again until I found resolution and healing ultimately.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that? Because I so agree with you that we have to really work through our body, through breath work or through therapy, whatever method we can find that helps us. But it's so true what you're saying. Like if we don't go deep and heal the reason why we attracted this situation firsthand, we're going to attract it again and again. So universe is kind of showing us the way. It's still there within you and you have to heal it. So what kind of techniques did you use to heal that part of yourself?
It wasn't until I'd say I reconnected with Tibetan Buddhism deeply, but also then married someone who that was a threat to him, anything other than Catholic. So there was a big part of me that, you know, as a woman, and we've all done this, why do I have to sacrifice or abandon a part of myself and my path and my power? And because the man that I'm with is insecure, because this empowers me. So the second that I agreed to abandon something, my life got very bad. And it wasn't until I got a divorce, and actually it was my body that shut down. I had to have heart surgery at 30. All this stuff just was like, nope, you're not going any further until you do this work. Yeah. So I had it was a great gift in my physical body, just like, you're not doing this anymore. And that wake up call, like, wow, I can either do the healing or I can die and not be here. So I had to make a choice. It was like Saturn return. And then right at 29, 30, I had to make a choice which path I was going to choose. And so I chose the path of healing. And for me, that looked like recovering from an eating disorder and getting into therapy and meditating every day and getting off of the antidepressants that I'd been on for so long because my life was so unstable. I needed them. There's a time and a place for that kind of support. It meant investing in myself in a way I hadn't, because I believed in myself. And so it was yoga, it was meditation, and it was a really disciplined, time for me. I took a vow of celibacy. I needed to stop. I needed to take out the one thing, or there were many things, but take out that piece of who I was sexually. You know, as we know, as women, as Western women, women who've been in the industry, were objectified. There's a whole slew of other people's thoughts of who we are. And it's hard to not play to that. It's hard, you know, when you're in a career where, you know, you are going to make money if people approve of you or want you or think you're sexy or think you're gorgeous. It was a really necessary point for me to take that out of the equation and say, I'm not going to use my sexuality. I'm not going to use any of those pieces at this point on my path. I need to figure out who I am beyond that, beyond people's view of me and what I was also perpetuating. I didn't know who I was and how to be without being flirtatious, without having that agenda. So for me, celibacy was a huge piece of my healing path and healing sexual trauma, sexual assault, to get to a place where I had my own back. I was keeping myself safe. It was one of the hardest times of my life because I truly didn't know who the hell I was without being that Carré Otis.
Yeah.
So this other piece of me had to emerge, and it was a big healing time. It was 5 years of celibacy, so 30 to 35, and then I met my current husband. But I had to go through all that to completely transform my life. So those are the different modalities that I used at that time.
Wow, thank you for sharing. That's beautiful, and what a journey! Like to really go deep, and to say yes to oneself, to say yes to that inner knowing within you, like this is what I have to do to take the next step. And 5 years, that's a long time. So good job. Yeah. So how do you think, how has this changed you to where you are now? Like you are a mother of two, and you're now sharing your work, through your book, but you're also very much involved in different organizations, sharing your message. Do you want to share something about that?
Yeah. A couple of so National Eating Disorder Association, I've been an ambassador for them for a long time, over 10 years. Recently, Model Alliance, which is a wonderful organization that's working on changing the law around working minors within the industry. I went and lobbied in Sacramento with Congressman Levine to try to pass a bill that basically says sexual assault and sexual harassment in the workplace is punishable. It didn't pass at the time, but it recently has. So
finally, right?
I'm like, oh my gosh. So those are some of the wonderful organizations that I support. Also, I've been working for the past 10 years with indigenous wisdom traditions and shaman from Peru, Denzel Santana. We're going to go to Peru in 2020. And then I'm really, really moved after 30 years of Tibetan Buddhism, moved to support our indigenous brothers and sisters. And we have a Huichol shaman coming here in June who's got 6,000 years of lineage that he's carrying. And I really feel that it is so important to hear the ways and teachings and medicines, of all of our indigenous communities, from the native here to the Huichol shaman. He's from Mexico. I work with sacred plant medicines, and so I've been twice to Africa to be initiated within the Bwiti. And the Bwiti is one of the oldest religions, but it's more of a philosophy like Tibetan Buddhism. It's more of a way of life. So I've been to Africa twice in the past few years, and continue just to work and study and support and be super outspoken about gender equality and raise my daughters in a way that's very conscious within community, because we have these young people and we have to pass this torch to them. And that torch is not one of despair because of what's happening to environment, but one of hope and how they're going to be able to manage and navigate.
Yeah.
Also an organization that's awesome, Knockout Abuse. Jill Sorensen, who was also a model, she's just phenomenal. I've spoken at 2 of their events, and it's an organization that works to educate about domestic violence as well as to bring women and children into shelters. So to raise money for those type of costs and protections.
That's
So
beautiful.
yeah,
Wow.
it's a busy, fulfilling journey.
Yeah, yeah, and I wrote about that also in my book, the importance of sacred plant medicine, how we can, it's not necessary, but it can really be a great tool to go deeper and beyond your conscious mind. So yeah, that's
It's an amazing catalyst, and for especially for those who have a practice, spiritual practice, a meditation practice. Plant medicine is an amazing tool that can take you very, very deep. And it's not something, again, that everybody needs to do. And it's not for everyone, but it's definitely, it's been used within these, communities since before doctors and psychiatrists and big pharma and all of that. That's been the medicine. And the shaman was the doctor. And this speaks to me, especially as we see things getting so out of whack. I know so many women who are medicated, and I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
It's an intense time on this planet. It's an intense time to be a woman. There is so much suffering going on, so it's a lot to hold. And it's not the only way. There was a way people did it for a long time.
Yes, right. That's so true. But it's also guiding us to where we need to be. So yeah. Well, that is really awesome. Thank you for sharing all that stuff. How do you think your children, like our children that are girls especially, because how society is always putting out that you have to be somebody through your physical features, and there's a lot of stress put on kids nowadays to be somebody through their appearance. What are some things that you could, advise them? What are some things that you can share with them that they can?
Yeah. So I've chosen to raise my daughters in a Waldorf school. So there's really limited media, which at this time where it's like unprecedented, I feel that that's a really good move. And kids can't self-regulate. Kids can't, they don't know when to shut off or stop eating sugar or turn it off. So I think we're seeing a lot of issues and developmental issues with this generation that's being raised in front of a phone or a computer. And there's so much, I look at my relationship with the media and my knowledge of the media, having been in entertainment for so long, and the level of premature sexualization, objectification, it's so there everywhere. And so the porn problem too. Most of our kids are being raised like their first sexual experiences are online pornography, where kids are having a harder and harder time relating and connecting, which is why I think bullying through social media it's so huge. So for me, there's a constant conversation that I've been having with my daughters, and it's validating who they are. And it doesn't have to do with their bodies. It has to do with their accomplishments. It has to do with their kindness and compassion. So there's a whole dialogue that as role models, as parents, we're very influential, either for the good or the bad. And for a mom and, any woman to be commenting on her own body or on the bodies of others, that's something that we model for our kids. So in my household, we don't comment. We don't talk about people's bodies. We talk about feelings. At the dinner table, it's not like, have you finished? You need to finish your plate. It's checking in. And do you feel full? Does your body feel full? I talk a lot with my girls about intuition, and they have a gut feeling because it's there to keep them safe. So one of the biggest jobs, especially for girls, is taking care of themselves. And I say to both Kaya and Jade, like, your biggest job in this lifetime is to take care of you. And so they're aware of like a level of self-care that I think a lot of 10 and 12-year-olds aren't. So there's a lot of conversation I have, and it's meaningful, and it's on purpose.
Yeah.
Because we can plant seeds or not and let them be raised by a culture that right now is really out of whack.
Yeah.
And that's been one of my problems within the entertainment industry, both with movies and modeling and any media, is who's holding, you know, these publications accountable, because we're still publishing really offensive, pornographic, rape culture, advertisements, editorial movies. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into like a PG movie and I have to take my kids out because they're flipped out about something in there.
Yeah.
So,
and there's also the subtle stuff. Like I saw this documentary about Disney, how sex was actually in there. If you saw through like their message, it was a lot of subtle message, like almost like programming, like, and for kids to think that these things are normal, and the younger they are, the better they should, you know, you should try early and everything. And it's kind of, yeah, it's like we're being numbed down in the society, like we're forgetting the true value of love and in intimacy, because especially here in the States, and maybe not so much in Sweden, where we're still having a little bit more natural communication when it comes to the body, and we're not so moral about it. But we also have a huge problem when it comes to sexuality. Like married couples are being, you know, destroyed because of pornography, for instance. So
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It's real.
So we really need to go back to source, and I think, and really teaching our kids to love and respect other people's bodies, of course, their own body as well. Like, this is a sacred system, and how can I use this body to love myself and to love people around me? So we have a lot of work to do there, for sure.
We do, and I feel like these are learned behaviors. You know, having my children have grown up in the Buddhist community, so they don't pull the legs off bugs. Like, there's a level of compassion and reverence for nature and for all living beings. And there's a lot of kids that aren't, these are learned behaviors. So a lot of it is what we've modeled. And I've also spoken with my girls about when there is a bully in school. The reality is that child is bullying because that's something that's been modeled for them before. That's something going on within their life outside of school.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So people who are interested in knowing more about what you're doing today, how can they come in contact with you? And if you would.
Well, it's so funny because I should have a website. I should, and I have, but it's not my project at this moment. You're going to have to wait for my second book, which I'm currently writing. I'd say right now, Instagram and social media is probably the best way to find out what I'm doing. I'm posting a lot of my activist subjects there. And I think that I'll probably wait until this book is out to put my website out.
We'll make sure we put the Instagram below so people can follow you. That would be great. Is there anything else you would like for our audience to know about you or your message? Like maybe one statement that really signifies your journey?
Progress, not perfection.
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful. That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Carré. I've loved hearing you speak, and I think you're an amazing woman and an inspiration to a lot of women who you are an inspiration to. So thank you so much for coming on the show. I look forward to talking to you soon again. All right. Thank you, babe.
Bye.